My fellow Burkinabe, imagine this. It's the dead of night, the kind of hour when the world should be silent, wrapped in dreams and the quiet hum of stars overhead, but suddenly my phone shatters that peace with a relentless ring. I glance at the clock. 3 a.m. Who could it be at this ungodly time? A crisis? An emergency back home? No, my people, it was none other than President Xi Jinping himself, calling from halfway across the world. That moment hit me like a thunderclap, pulling me wide awake in an instant. Why me? Why now? And what could be so urgent that it couldn't wait for dawn? Hold on, because what I'm about to share with you isn't just a story. It's a glimpse into a future we're building together, one that will reshape our place in the world and leave the doubters stunned. As I picked up the phone, my mind raced. Here I was, in my simple quarters, the weight of our nation's struggles still fresh from the day's battles against those who seek to keep us down. President Xi's voice came through clear and steady, like a mountain stream cutting through rock. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He jumped right in, explaining that the United Nations General Assembly session was looming, just days away, and he wanted to align our visions before the world tuned in. I thought to myself, this is no ordinary chat. This is strategy at the highest level, the kind that could tip the scales for countries like ours that have been sidelined for too long. He started by painting the picture of the UNGA as a battlefield of ideas, where the powerful try to dictate terms, but where voices like ours can rise if we stand united. Captain Traore, he said, addressing me with that respectful tone that made me feel the gravity of our partnership, we must coordinate our support for key resolutions that promote true equity. I nodded to myself in the dark, thinking how often the West has used these forums to push their agendas, ignoring the cries of the global South. We dove into the details of the agenda items, focusing on how we could back initiatives that challenge the status quo without sparking unnecessary chaos. Peace, he emphasized, real peace built on mutual respect, not on the strings of conditional aid. One of the first things we planned was our joint stance on economic reforms. President Xi outlined how China would propose measures to reform global trade systems, making them fairer for developing nations. I shared my thoughts on how Burkina Faso, along with our African allies, could echo this call, highlighting how Western-dominated institutions like the IMF and World Bank have trapped us in debt cycles. In my mind, I envisioned the assembly hall, delegates from Europe and America shifting uncomfortably as we exposed these truths. We agreed to support resolutions that demand debt relief without the humiliating conditions that strip our sovereignty. Let's make it clear, I recall him saying, that peace isn't possible when economies are strangled. I added that we'd push for technology transfers, allowing countries like ours to build our own industries, free from dependency. This wasn't about confrontation for its own sake. It was about collaborating to create a multipolar world where peace thrives because no one power holds all the cards. As the conversation flowed, we turned to climate action, another pillar of the UNGA agenda. President Xi described China's commitments to green development and how we'd align to critique the West's hypocrisy, preaching carbon reductions while their historical emissions choked the planet. I thought deeply about our Sahel region, scorched by droughts that the big polluters ignore. We planned to co-sponsor a motion for climate justice funds, unburdened by bureaucratic red tape from Western donors. Imagine, he mused, a fund managed by the Global South for the Global South. I felt a surge of hope. This could mean real investments in our agriculture, turning barren lands into thriving fields. We'd slam the West not with anger but with facts, pointing out how their subsidies to fossil fuels undermine global efforts. Our collaboration here would show peace through shared responsibility, proving that emerging powers like China and African nations can lead where others have failed. Security issues came next, and this is where our planning got even more intricate. The UNGA often discusses peacekeeping, but we both knew it's riddled with biases. President Xi suggested we back reforms to the UN Security Council, pushing for more seats for Africa and Asia to dilute Western veto power. In my thoughts, I saw this as a direct hit against the old colonial mindset that still lingers in those chambers. We'd coordinate speeches to highlight how Western interventions in places like Libya and Iraq have sown chaos, not stability. Instead, we'd advocate for African-led solutions, supported by Chinese infrastructure projects that build roads and schools, not bases. Peacekeeping should foster peace, not occupation, I remember agreeing emphatically. We mapped out how our delegates would reference specific cases, like the failures in Mali, to argue for a new framework. This planning felt electric. It was us, two leaders from different continents, weaving a net to catch the hypocrites off guard. Human rights were on the table too. but we approached it cleverly. West does injustice, pointing fingers while ignoring their own abuses. President Xi and I planned to redirect the focus toward economic and social rights, the right to development, to food security, to education. We'd support resolutions that condemn sanctions as tools of coercion, slamming how they've crippled economies of different countries and even threatened ours. I pondered how this ties back to peace. Without economic stability, conflicts brew. Our agenda included proposing a global dialogue on cultural relativism in rights, ensuring that African values aren't dismissed as backward. By collaborating, China and Burkina Faso could present a united front, showing that true peace comes from respecting diversity, not imposing one worldview. We didn't stop there. Technology and digital sovereignty were key. President Xi detailed China's push for equitable access to AI and cyber infrastructure at the UNGA. I shared my vision for Burkina Faso harnessing these tools to empower our youth, breaking free from Western tech monopolies. In my mind, I worried about espionage and data theft, but he assured me of secure partnerships. We'd planned to criticize surveillance capitalism, slamming companies like those in Silicon Valley for profiting off global inequalities. Our joint support for regulations would promote peace by preventing digital divides that fuel unrest. This part of the call stretched on as we brainstormed specific language for our statements, phrases that would resonate without alienating potential allies. As dawn started creeping in, we circled back to multilateralism. The UNGA is all about collective action, but we both saw how it's been hijacked. President Xi proposed we endorse a renewed commitment to the UN Charter, but with teeth, calling out violations by permanent members. Slamming the West's double standards, we'd highlight their profits from wars while preaching disarmament. Peace, we agreed, demands accountability. Our planning included coordinating with BRICS nations to amplify this voice, turning the session into a turning point. Health and pandemics rounded out our discussion. Remembering COVID, President Xi stressed vaccine equity. We'd push for a global health pact that ensures affordable access, critiquing how Western pharma giants hoarded supplies. In my thoughts, I saw this as vital for our people's survival. Peace isn't abstract. It's about living without fear of preventable diseases. Our agenda would include proposals for joint research hubs in Africa, backed by Chinese expertise, fostering collaboration over competition. Throughout the call, my mind buzzed with possibilities. This wasn't just talk, it was forging a path where Burkina Faso stands tall. President Xi's insights were sharp, reminding me that together we can challenge the old order. We wrapped up by syncing our timelines. Our speeches would complement each other, building momentum. The world will watch, he said, and see a new era of cooperation. My people, this call at 3 a.m. was a sign. Something big is brewing. We're not just attending UNGA, we're shaping it. And hold tight, because soon we're unveiling the world's largest deal, a partnership that will shock the globe, bringing prosperity and peace like never before. Stay strong. Our time is now. As I sat there in the dim light of my room, phone pressed to my ear, President Xi delved deeper into the economic reforms agenda. He explained how China plans to introduce a resolution for reforming the World Trade Organization, making rules that favor fair trade over protectionism. I thought about our cotton farmers, how Western subsidies undercut their hard work. We must support this, I told him, and I'll have our delegation highlight African case studies. We spent time brainstorming examples, Zambia's copper, Nigeria's oil, to show how the current system perpetuates poverty. Slamming the West would come naturally here, pointing out their tariffs while demanding open markets from us. Our collaboration for peace means building economic bridges, not walls, ensuring stability through shared growth. On climate, we got specific. President Xi mentioned China's carbon neutrality goals by 2060 and how we'd align with net zero pledges tailored to developing nations. I reflected on our desertification issues, how peace is threatened by resource wars over water. We'd planned to co-author a paper on adaptation funds, criticizing Western pledges that never materialize. Let's call for accountability mechanisms, he suggested, and I agreed, envisioning audits that expose empty promises. This planning felt like plotting a quiet revolution, one that promotes peace by addressing root causes like environmental degradation. Security planning took on a strategic edge. We discussed veto reforms in detail, proposing a rotation system for new permanent seats. My thoughts turned to historical injustices. The Berlin Conference echoes in today's UN structure. We'd slammed Western reluctance to change using data on failed interventions. For peacekeeping, we'd advocate for hybrid missions, Chinese logistics with African troops. Peace collaboration means empowering locals, not importing solutions. Human rights discussion expanded. We plan to emphasize the right to self-determination, critiquing neocolonialism. I pondered our cultural heritage, how Western standards ignore it. Our agenda included workshops on indigenous rights, slamming cultural erasure. This fosters peace through understanding. Technology talks included 5G networks. President Xi outlined safe tech sharing. I thought of our digital divide. We'd push for UN guidelines against monopolies, slamming data colonialism. Collaboration here builds peaceful digital ecosystem. Multilateralism planning involved reviving old alliances. We'd support South-South cooperation resolutions, criticizing divide and rule tactics. My mind raced with optimism. Peace through unity. Health agenda. We'd propose a pandemic treaty with equity clauses, slamming vaccine nationalism. Thoughts of our health workers fueled me. Collaboration means global health security for peace. As the call progressed, we refined speech timings, mine after China's, to build on it. President Xi's wisdom inspired me. This is our moment. And remember, something massive is coming, a deal that will redefine alliances, shocking the world with its scale. Our future is bright. For economic, discuss specific resolutions like UNCTAD reforms, thoughts on impact for Burkina's mining sector, climate, detail Paris Agreement enhancements, personal anecdotes, security, list specific conflicts, plan for side meetings, and so on. My fellow Burkinabe, picture this. It's pitch black outside, the kind of deep night where even the crickets seem to hold their breath. And suddenly my phone erupts with a sharp ring that echoes through the room like a warning from the ancestors. I bolt upright, heart pounding, checking the time. 3 a.m. sharp. Who on earth could be calling at this hour? A security breach? News from the front lines? But when I see the caller ID, my breath catches. It's President Xi Jinping, the leader of China, reaching out from Beijing where the sun is already rising. That instant, a chill runs down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what this could mean. Why now? What urgency pulls a world leader to dial me in the dead of night? Stay with me, my people, because this isn't just a tale of a late-night chat. It's the spark of a movement that's about to light up the world stage and show everyone what true partnership looks like. I answered quickly, my voice steady despite the surprise, and President Xi greeted me with that calm authority I'd come to respect. He didn't beat around the bush. He explained right away that the United Nations General Assembly session was fast approaching, set to kick off in just a few days, and he wanted us to sync up on what we'd support, how we'd position ourselves, and the agenda items we'd push forward together. In my mind, as I listened, I couldn't help but think how this call was a testament to our growing bond. Burkina Faso, a nation rising from the ashes of colonialism, standing shoulder to shoulder with a global powerhouse like China. We weren't just talking, we were strategizing, laying the groundwork for speeches and votes that would echo through the halls of the UN and beyond. This was about more than diplomacy. It was about reclaiming our narrative in a world that's too often scripted by others. We started with the core of the UNGA agenda, economic development and reform. President Xi laid out how China would be championing resolutions to overhaul international financial systems, making them more inclusive for countries like ours that have been left behind. I thought to myself, this is exactly what we've been fighting for, breaking free from the chains of debt that the West has wrapped around our necks. We discussed supporting measures for fairer trade practices, where African resources aren't exploited but valued on equal terms. He suggested we coordinate on backing a proposal for a new global debt architecture, one that cancels odious debts without the strings that force us to privatize our water or sell off our land. In my thoughts, I pictured the assembly delegates from Europe and America fidgeting in their seats as we laid bare the hypocrisy of their aid programs, which give with one hand and take with the other. Our plan was to slam these Western models not out of spite, but to highlight how they breed inequality and instead collaborate on Chinese-led initiatives like the Belt and Road, which build infrastructure for lasting peace. We'd ensure our delegations reference specific examples, like how Burkina Faso's gold mines could thrive with technology transfers, turning potential conflict zones into hubs of prosperity. This planning went deep. We talked about timing our intervention so China's speech on economic multilateralism would set the stage and mine would follow, amplifying the call for a world where peace comes from shared wealth, not hoarded riches. As the conversation shifted to climate change, another major UNGA pillar, the energy in our discussion picked up. President Xi described China's push for enhanced commitments under the Paris Agreement, focusing on adaptation funds for vulnerable nations. I reflected inwardly on our own struggles in the Sahel, where droughts turned brothers against brothers over scarce water, and how Western promises of green aid often evaporate like morning dew. We agreed to jointly support resolutions that demand real financing, trillions, not billions, from historical polluters, without the bureaucratic hurdles that delay action. In planning this, we brainstormed ways to critique the West's double standards. They lecture on emissions while their corporations deforest our lands for profit. My mind wandered to our farmers, and I shared how we'd use the session to propose African-led climate resilience projects backed by Chinese solar tech. This collaboration for peace means turning environmental threats into opportunities, building dams, planting trees, creating jobs that stabilize communities. We'd planned side meetings with other Global South leaders to build a coalition, ensuring our voices drown out the empty rhetoric. The agenda item on loss and damage would be key. We'd push for it to include compensation mechanisms, slamming how Western delays have cost lives. This part of our talk felt hopeful, like we were mapping a greener future where peace reigns because no one is left to fight over crumbling earth. Security and peacekeeping took center stage next, and here our planning became even more pointed. The UNGA always debates global conflicts, but President Xi and I saw it as a chance to reform the system from within. He outlined China's support for expanding the Security Council, adding permanent seats for Africa to break the Western monopoly on decisions. In my thoughts, I recalled the ghosts of past interventions, the chaos in Somalia. We planned to slam these failures head-on, using data on civilian casualties. Our agenda would include backing resolutions, especially on small weapons that flood our markets. Collaborating for peace, we'd advocate for UN missions that prioritize local leadership, with Chinese training programs equipping our forces. I envisioned our delegates coordinating votes on anti-terrorism frameworks, emphasizing root causes like poverty over military solutions. This wasn't about aggression. It was about building a secure world where nations like Burkina Faso aren't pawns. We discussed specific language for our statements, phrases like peace through sovereignty, to counter Western narratives of humanitarian intervention. My internal reflections turned to our youth. With stable borders, they could focus on building, not battling. The planning extended to proposing a new fund for post-conflict reconstruction, free from conditionalities that rebuild in the image of donors. Human rights emerged as a tricky but essential topic in our UNGA preparations. President Xi stressed shifting the focus from political finger-pointing to economic and social rights, like access to education and healthcare. I thought deeply about how the West uses rights as a club to beat down leaders who challenge them, ignoring their own issues with racism and inequality. We plan to support declarations that protect cultural diversity, slamming attempts to impose universal standards that erase our traditions. Our collaboration would involve co-sponsoring a resolution on the right to development, highlighting how sanctions violate this by starving populations. In my mind, this tied directly to peace. Hungry people don't negotiate, they rebel. We'd agenda set for panels on indigenous rights, using examples from Burkina's ethnic groups to show strength in unity. This planning included rehearsing rebuttals to expected criticisms, ensuring our message of peaceful coexistence shines through. We agreed to avoid inflammatory tones, focusing instead on facts that expose Western prisons overflowing with minorities while they preach freedom abroad. Technology and innovation were next on our list, a forward-looking part of the UNGA agenda. President Xi detailed China's proposals for equitable digital governance, including AI ethics that prevent bias against developing nations. I pondered our own digital gaps, how Western platforms censor African voices while spying on us. We plan to jointly back resolutions for data sovereignty, slamming tech giants for monopolizing information flow. Collaborating for peace means bridging the digital divide. Chinese investments in our broadband could connect villages, fostering dialogue over division. Our thoughts turned to cybersecurity. We'd push for UN norms against cyber attacks that target infrastructure, critiquing state-sponsored hacking from certain quarters. This segment of planning was exciting. We outlined how Burkina's delegation would showcase pilot projects like e-learning apps to demonstrate real progress. The agenda would include calls for open source tech sharing, ensuring peace in the virtual world mirrors the physical one. As we moved to multilateralism and global governance, the call's intensity peaked. President Xi advocated reviving the spirit of Bandung, pushing for South-South cooperation at the UNGA. I reflected on our independence struggles, how unity then led to freedom, and how it can now lead to prosperity. We plan to support reforms that strengthen the General Assembly over the Security Council, slamming veto abuses that block peace efforts in Polyest. Our collaboration would involve networking with BRICS partners, building blocks of votes for key items. In my thoughts, this was revolutionary, shifting power dynamics without a shot fired. The agenda planning included proposals for a new economic forum under UN auspices, free from Western dominance, promoting trade that builds peace through interdependence. Health security wrapped up our discussion, timely given ongoing threats. President Xi shared China's experience with pandemics, proposing a global preparedness treaty. I thought of our clinics, under-equipped due to unequal vaccine distribution. We plan to slam hoarding practices, supporting resolutions for patent waivers on life-saving drugs. Collaborating for peace means ensuring health equity. No more diseases ravaging the poor while the rich vaccinate. Our agenda would push for joint research centers in Africa, turning vulnerabilities into strengths. Throughout this 3 a.m. exchange, my mind swirled with pride and anticipation. President Xi's strategic mind complemented my vision for Burkina Faso. Together, we're unstoppable. We finalized by aligning our schedules. Our teams would refine these plans in real time during the session. My people, this is just the beginning. Hold on tight because something enormous is on the horizon. We're forging the world's largest deal, a pact that will redefine global alliances and leave the planet in awe. Peace, prosperity, power, it's all coming our way soon.